Right now, it seems that the popular reputation of the Clear Quran is the best of the Quran translations right now. And I would agree with the formatting of the different editions, whether they have the Arabic or they have the English only or some other translation, is very good for a beginner. There are some issues with some of the comments, like falsely claiming that the Zoroastrians were fire worshippers. They worshipped around the fire, but they didn't worship fire. There were angel worshippers and various things among them, but fire worship was not something that the ancient Persians did. The ancient Slavic people did. And it's not attributed to the prophet, this false claim either. I mean, not directly. There's not a hadith that says that Muhammad taught that the Persians were fire worshippers. And I would not use the word Gentile because of its biblical usage and origin in context, because the Arabic word ummi, you can say commoner, but not backward individual. Gawin in Arabic, you wouldn't say goyim or guya, which is the singular using the Aramaic, Hebrew, because that means turn your back on God. So the goyim are those who turn their back on God. There is a place or so where the meaning would be correct, but the direct translation of the words isn't. So 38:37, where it says, Washayatin, you shouldn't have jinn, but devils, because the devils are the ones who chose to be that way. Isn't there a phrase somewhere that says from the jinn? As far as the devils. So it's important to make that qualification. The headers are very useful. The footnotes also. You can clearly distinguish between what's being translated and words added for understanding or flow in English. The footnotes and the headnotes are such that they don't come off too sectarian. This is particularly true with Surah 66. Surah 80 definitely takes an obvious Sunni commentary. Surah 2 doesn't really seem to. And it's important to remember that the Quran doesn't exactly call anybody pagan or heathen or infidel just because there's a difference in their religion. And, it doesn't hold back to whatever. And the comments in here, another strength to them, and its organization into little sections, the translations of the Suwar, is that the comments that do occur in the footnotes are the headers, don't pigeonhole the passages to a particular time right? Our place. So it's left as a open book and not just an Arab thing, because it's important to realize that, the point of the Quran is not as Arab or medieval culture or something. I would have liked a more explicit translation as far as Surah 5, Ayat 103, because just saying that there are camel and other animal superstitions that we are not to take part in is, not quite fulfilling it. Give us the examples. I know we're talking about a sentence each, and maybe that should go in a footnote. But I think it's important for all the translations to give us literal or at least example explanatory things of some of these particular terms. One thing that this translation does is you have a breakup between the themes. Well, I mean, it points out that you're dealing with either belief in spiritual matters, you're dealing with stories, or you're dealing with other teachings, because morals and ethics are definitely mixed Quranically. Of course, the words being used enable us to practice them anywhere. A lot of the stuff in the Bible is very particular to a particular climate and time of what's being prescribed, but you don't get that impression in the Quran. Prime examples of this, and as is made clear by this translation, is, the food and clothing and the teachings in regards to drugs, because it's not limited to a particular thing like people would generally expect. There are comments that draw parallels with Judeo-Christian teachings, and it admits that the Christians and the Jews do not interpret some of these passages this way. Even some of them that seem very clear. I mean, obviously, because they haven't accepted Islam, there are Jews and Christians that sneak off and do pilgrimage to Mecca because of what their sources teach. I mean, this doesn't really go into that, but, there is the admittance that people don't always interpret things quite all the same way. Although it's not overbearing with this, but it does point out that there are things about the structure and the emphasis and such that really comes through with the Quran, and it comes through stronger in Arabic. And of course, every scripture really is only in the language that it was revealed in. I mean, you could say there's inspired scriptures, so the teachings of prophets were compiled. Like, I think all translations should do, is it addresses some of the issues that people had with previous translations. Because if you have an issue with the translation, like you can point out any verse that you have an issue with, it's like, okay, maybe you just don't believe that sort of thing. But there could be some inflection of a translation that you personally interpret something out of that's not there in the text. So that's important to consider. But this one, in noticing how some passages were translated, it's like, oh, people aren't getting the right idea. Like, for example, if you say that God leads someone astray, that's never said in the Quran. It says that people are not taking in the guidance of God. well, God in parentheses, but La Yuhibbu are, and Nahu. Yeah, anyways, there's some variations of that contain the word God, but it doesn't say that God misguides, because you have the word misguide. You say that people become misguided. Um, so it's right there in the Arabic, because if you say that God misguides, then it's like, or God's not guiding, that's again something that forms an issue. It's like they're not taking in the guidance of God. And sometimes you need some guidance, you need some context and stuff to, bring stuff about. And there's the reminder that Islam sees itself as promoting and being a part of all science. Now, that doesn't mean everything that technology or information is used for. Um, there are certainly sayings elsewhere that are not mentioned here that point out is that knowledge only becomes correct in accord with what has been revealed. Um, but, it's like when I say mythology is greater than science, because mythology is when you employ the meaning and purpose involved in these things. It's not, there's a biblical passage, these cleverly imagined stories full of meaning, they're really true this time. And it's like, well, fable and myth aren't quite the same thing as fiction. And the thing in that passage is it's not that they're saying there's a problem with myth, it's that people who lie with their myth, right? So Islam brings forward this idea that, the reality, you engage in the reality. You don't try to move your way towards, a conception where you just claim you're right. You, you withhold. That's one of the things pointed out too, is you don't overly question and make everything too strict. I was like, okay, some of the questions people ask me about memes and can you wear a particular color hat? And it's like, or that sort of stuff. And pagan, probably when you see the word pagan, just think New Ager, really, because it's the same stuff. A great thing about this translation is it points out that some of the commentaries are repeating things that just people said. And that's not how it works. That's not the same thing as when the Quran talks about those grounded in the knowledge. We're not supposed to be speculators. We're supposed to speak based on knowledge. And not everything is coming through the prophet or through a chain of individuals that say that their teaching is from the prophet, whether they're pointing out in everything, single saying, so they're spiritual, so you're not having that sort of thing. Now, like, for example, in the Abadi community, they would pass on their commentaries and stuff, but they weren't as strict as other people with, the sayings. They just said, oh, it's being said in our community, and that's, that's not quite the prophetic approach. The commentary emphasizes in some parts the aspect of perspective. The consciousness and deeds result in different perspective. And Islam is not your typical Abrahamic faith where you have, true Abrahamic is not the professional priesthood. It's not, so you can be direct about your religion. There are some comments that are very important in the modern world, because, people think, oh, if we're fighting for our side, we're not the terrorists, and we're not. It's like Islam doesn't see it that way. You don't pick sides politically that way. You may be forced into, being complacent because you have no idea what to do and you don't feel safe expressing anything else. And I understand that. But this translation points out that there's a difference between the holy wars, where you fight to force your religion on other people and to conquer land and stuff, and what the Quran is actually teaching. And, certain verses that people might take out of context, there's some history to that. There's some scant notes. It's not a lecture on the 43 Ghazawat. Well, I think Bukhari mentions 47, and does Muslim mention 45? But there's an agreement among the scholars, I think, that 43 is a number. I mean, for those who look at the bigger picture, some only say like 20 something or something, but that's because they haven't gone over as many sources. But those who go over the sources that point out all these expeditions, and yeah, you find chronically a lot of the things that you think, oh, well, just Abrahamic religions do that. Islam's like, that's not what it is. And it takes the blame away from the prophets that previous nations put things on, right? 3762 tells you what Sakum is, but I would want a more literal translation of that because it's like a stifling, right? Kind of like when you get sick and, so it's difficult to swallow. The fruit of the tree of punishment. A point can also be drawn of the comments that point out that Islam is easier than what the Bible actually calls for, and how it makes clear some of the issues that would be talked about biblically. Doctrines support a relationship with divinity. Stories tell you, hey, you're not the only one, and it tells you about possibilities in different ways. And then we have the inviting about what you don't know through what you know. Notes include or emphasize information about the overall equality or potential of the male, the female, and people of whatever ancestry. It goes beyond moral relativism, and it generally just leaves you with this idea that the Quran is the summary of all good and truth. It specifically indicates that Prophet Muhammad was inspired, and so that will give examples and explanations that experience isn't shut off, that it can be attached to the pursuit of knowledge through other sources, and that it has function and meaning for everyone to be both active and passive in this wide ocean that is religion.